Let's talk about a world-class approach for quantity surveyors to procuring.
You are dependent on the resilience of your supply chain, particularly at Groundworks, and you see that in the companies that we work closely with. You need to have a line in the sand of when you need construction issue information from them to procure the groundworks, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Are you hoping?
Yeah. I know where you're going with this.
Is the reason why you're doing this because you don't want to be on site on the 1st of July? Hello and welcome to episode 186 of the Own and Build podcast with me, Paul Hemming. I've missed you, Chris. Chris is back in the studio, Chris Barber, CVO at C-Link, quantity surveyor extraordinaire. Really happy to have you back in the studio, mate. How the devil are we?
I'd like to say the feeling is mutual, but I've been on with you since 7 a.m. this morning, so I've not missed you that much.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to be nice, but yeah, equally, I didn't want to start a meeting with you at 7 a.m, but here we are, mate. So, in a slight change in content-wise, so over probably the last 6 months or so, you and I have done a lot of talking on the show about kind of what we dubbed the future of main contracting, future of contracting for main and subs. And in the next round of episodes, what we're going to try and talk about and tease out of one another is what we consider to be world-class quantity surveying. So with that in mind, let's talk about today a world-class approach for quantity surveyors to procuring a subcontract package. Now, you know me, all I love talking about is curtain walling cladding. Not love, it's all I've got in the locker. What potentially could we talk about? Give me a few packages and I'll pick one.
I'm not sure why you're talking to me about world-class procurement now.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, there's lots you can choose from, Paul, when you've worked on the main contract side. You can go from groundworks through to the roof, through to the M&E. You take a pick.
Well, you see, I want to do a tough one. I want to see if you are actually as world-class as you suggest. So I guess we're starting a new series of content, so why don't we start from the beginning? Let's do groundworks, right? And for everybody listening, if you're on episode 186, you probably know by now that I am subcontract specialist and limited to curtain walling, cladding, etc. So I may be a little touch out of my depth here as an interviewer. So please do write in and tell me if I've let Chris get away with murder at any point in doing this groundworks package. So I'm quite surprised actually you didn't pick procurement of a fine red wine, mate, which would be much more like you. Anyway, so let's talk about groundworks, right? Because just in its name, it's quite wide range, isn't it, groundwork? So when we talk about doing groundworks, let's kind of picture we're on a particular project. Tell us what you see this project as being and what is in this groundworks package.
Firstly, Paul, I'm not very happy you've picked one of the hardest ones. It's a Friday afternoon.
You put it forward.
I didn't. I just gave you a selection. You could have picked something else.
It was either going to be that or M&E, and I actually think this one is probably a bit easier, so you got lucky.
Yeah, I mean, the groundworks can be as kind of simple or as complicated, depending on the type of build, right? Mm-hmm. So some of the buildings I was involved in, we were doing like double-story basements in existing buildings, which is very complex. You have stuff like piling, underpinning, and the nature of the build is very complex and quite slow, actually.
Should we do, or to make this a bit easier, do you want to pick a project that you've done? We don't have to name it, but you can say Central London, double-story basement or whatever. Pick that, and then we can talk about how we would go about procuring it.
Yeah, let's just pick a groundworks that could encompass a few packages, and we can take it from that because it can have a different layers, like I said, with things like piling would be encompassed and potentially temporary work. So I instantly grimace a little bit when it comes to the groundworks because let's set the scene, right?
Yeah.
The company you're working for, you're a QS. Company you're working for has just won a project. They're all going down the pub, celebrating, let's have a few beers.
Loving life.
Yeah, this is great. And they've promised the client they're going to start in 4 weeks' time. Let's say they're going to mobilise really quickly because it's a sweetener people put into the deals. Now, with knowing that you've got a bit of a gun to your head to start, mm-hmm. There's a lot of factors to consider here. So, firstly, you'd be wanting your estimating team to have done a very diligent job at the start to make sure that groundworks package can be as clean as possible at starting. So, and what I mean by that is as few kind of provisional sums, unknowns as possible. Now, when you're digging in the ground, you're not going to know everything that's below there. But you could have something like the temporary works where you kind of see at the start might be have a provisional sum against it, and it's not as well defined as it could be. And you would want to know that you want that defined as much as possible before you start, because when you're trying to procure this groundwork package, you're going to be highly reliant on the expertise of who tendered it at tender stage. Have they
the specialists?
Yeah, the specialist subcontractors. So how has that been evolved over time? Because naturally, during the estimating process to agreeing a contract, main contractor to the client, you've got to have gone through a process where you're trying to dot the I's and cross the T's. So you really, really need to, there's a lot of pressure really on the estimating team that they have thought about it diligently and comprehensively. And also between them and the people who are negotiating the contract have kind of G'd up the subcontractor, because you have got a limited time to kind of retender it. So you secure a packet, you secure this contract. In theory, day one, you get construction issue drawings. So then those construction issue drawings need to go to the subcontractors who tendered, but you're under such tight timescales. Those people who might have tendered 3-4 months ago might not be sat there waiting for your construction issue drawings to come through to reprice the project.
But let me take you back to just that point alone, because this is, for loads of people that I've interviewed on this show, what you just described is a sticking point generally, right? Or it's a bit like, should I have a bill, should I not have a bill? Some people say I don't need a bill, some people I want to give it to the subbies, some people say I must have a bill, right? Retendering to subbies, right? So you, particularly with the groundworks package and these highly technical complex packages, at estimating stage, pre-con, they've gone through and they have got, let's say, if they've done that diligence that you're asking them to do, 3 prices from, let's say, 3 specialists who the company knows well. You may have even worked with them before, right? Which would help. What's your preference? I think I know the answer, but do you go back just to those 3 and just kind of try and close a tender with them? Do you completely re-tender with those 3 as a QS as opposed to an estimator and tighten things up a little bit? Or do you just do, I know this groundwork on the previous project I really like, when you go out to 4 or 5, like what do you think is morally the right thing to do?
There's a bit to unpack there. So, in my opinion, if it's an early package, you should have a bit of a hybrid approach with the estimating team, who's tendered, who's had those initial discussions, been down to the site, because at this stage you haven't got the luxury to kind of retender with fresh people. And if you are, I think it's a bit unethical.
Specifically on the groundworks package.
Yes, because it's the critical path. You haven't got time to waste, and I don't think it'd be unfair to waste new people's time on pricing it. So you are dependent on the resilience of your supply chain, particularly at groundworks. And you see that in the companies that we work closely with. A lot of them have their favoured groundworker, and they have one, which is a risk on its own, because if something happens to that subcontractor,
you're knackered.
Yeah, you can see why they have they are so reliant and like to have 1 or 2 favoured groundworkers, because that relationship of being able to start really quickly, it helps so many negotiations early on with clients, helps you secure work, and being agile is so critical, I think, in these early stages.
So I'm nervous now. I'm your boss again. I'm a bit nervous so this project that we're starting on, high risk, it's in central London or whatever, right? It's flagship project for us, really important. And we've gone through the tender stage, gone through pre-con, and they said you're going to start in June and we'll have a decision by March. That decision squeaks into April. It's now April, and all of a sudden it's halfway through April, and you've got a letter of intent. Now it's May, and you're maybe starting in June, and you've got the contract. And you quite rightly said, and I think it was the correct answer to say that, specifically on the groundworks package, re-tendering is something you don't necessarily need to do if the estimator has done things right. However, and apologies to all my estimating friends out there, of which there are many, I am worried that you're going to have not a huge amount of time to procure perhaps the single most important package on the project. It might not be the most important, but it's high risk and it starts everything off. So at what point, because you said, oh yeah, they're all down the pub and they were celebrating, they've won this job, and then that's Friday. On Monday, they're like, Chris, here's the handover document, get cracking, ruffle your hair and say, off you pop. That screams out to me, huge problem. So at what point in that project program or tender program that I was outlining, April, May, June, when do you think you should start to be involved? Because I don't think you can trust the estimate. Again, no slight on estimating, but it's a different set of risk allocation and understanding that a QS goes through. So when should you be involved?
Yeah, it's a tough one to really give a firm answer for, because I was typically, job was handed over, then you're procuring literally the next day. You didn't even have a chance to kind of set up the project. You might be just procuring packages early without having that fully aligned team and your own like understanding of that project. Because the ideal world for me would be, let's just say we think we're getting close on this. Mm-hmm. If we win it, we need to have a conversation internally, like have like almost like a pre meeting before it's secured, a couple of weeks at least out, and then you can sort of flag some risks from a practical sense side of things. So if I was an owner of a main contracting business and I was going through this process and I had a team of QSs, estimators, project managers, I would be doing like feasibility almost with those guys way in advance of securing it. And you don't want to get too burdensome with loads of meetings and lots of time, but there should be some kind of, you're going to get a good feel for, are we going to win this? We might win this. So if so, getting the right people in the room, bringing a QS into some of these negotiations early on before the contract's let, bringing the project manager in, anyone who's got those kind of construction expertise, and then just having a practical sit down saying, look, if we win this, the key risk elements, the top 3 items we need to close off are this, this, and this. Groundworks needs to basically be procured straight away. So we're going to use PH, Paul Hemming, groundworkers.
I think you want to do that, mate.
Let's get them back in, talk to them, meet them on site or whatever. Get to really understand their availability, right? Because that's so key. Like subcontractors can't just turn on a dime necessarily. So get them involved early. So it's that early contractor engagement, but also that early kind of project team, delivery team engagement. I would say in the smaller organisations and main contractors, I didn't really happen when I was there, but that on reflection, that's something I would like to
and I mean, this goes back to, and I think you need to rewind, if you're new to the show, to the roundabout episode 150, somewhere around there. Chris and I sitting down about what is the new way to manage your supply chain in terms of subcontractors, and it's building that pipeline, building that relationship so that you can actually say to them, I need to rely on you. You're one of 2 in this tender, and we're not going to re-tender it, or we're going to do whatever, but you've got to help me to win this work, and then we can work on this together, which is often quite the challenge with specialists, right? So it's just this conversation alone is making me reflect on my own experience. And so when we won work at my former employer, almost a decade ago now, amazingly, the way that we would work, so I was managing a team of say 10, 12 QSs, and I was the commercial lead, and if we were winning a new job or it smelt right, I would go kind of like on behalf of the commercial team to iron out any pre-procurement that we were doing, which for us was a little bit less than you would have with the ground worker, and also fully ascertain what's going on. And the impact that had on projects once I had been involved to the ones that previously is absolutely massive. So I definitely think you want a QS in the room or a commercially minded person in the room for that period that I described as April, May and June, right? Because you don't want to just give you the QS, right, it's Monday, off you pop, we've got to get a ground worker on site in 4 weeks. That's hell, isn't it? Yeah. And it completely doesn't work. So that definitely strikes me as something that needs to be done. Okay, so we've barely done anything here, but I think we've outlined kind of what the expectation would be before you getting the call and it's Monday and you need to procure, right? After the break, let's come back and it's Monday morning and now we're going to devise our procurement strategy and actually execute the procurement on this package.
Oh dear, can I go for a beer first?
No. Right, okay, so we've had a good weekend on the booze, Chris, and it's Monday morning. It's our example, so we've gone through pre-con, you've been involved at some stage in pre-con, and it's Monday morning, we're handing over the project to you. I'm now the estimating department, pre-con, hand over the package to you, and I want to know what you're going to do and what the key components of this Groundworks procurement is going to be. It's June the 1st when we're winning this project, and the program, our main contract, says we're starting on site on July the 1st. You got a month. How do we go about procuring this Groundworks package?
Bit nervous now, Paul. Well, there's a part of me, right, that wants to get the information release schedule done. So let's assume this working under a JCT contract, and the IRS could be down to the architect, but most of the time that's lined through and it's down to the main contractor to produce, which is I kind of agree with, because the main contractor should control the elements of that. So you really kind of need to get that together. And the reason why I say that is because you need to have a line in the sand of when you need construction issue information from them to procure the groundworks, essentially. So if you don't have that,
are you hoping, by the way?
Yeah. I know where you're going with this.
Is the reason why you're doing this because you don't want to be on site on the 1st of July and you're trying to find a get out? You're so readable.
I know.
But actually, this is world class procurement, right? Actually, take a moment, have a look at the information. Do I have everything that I need? And if I don't, that might give me breathing space. Is that what you're saying?
You read me like a book, Paul.
What are you? This is really interesting. So, what are you asking for or checking in the IRS to try and create an environment where you don't have all the information that you want? What are you asking for?
I look like I'm hungry for an EOT, and
I'm
not.
It's Monday morning. It's not even lunch yet. And this is classic. I'm not sure if this is world-class quantities, man. Some people would say it is, some people would say it isn't. But I'm liking where you're going. Go on.
You've got to protect yourself commercially, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've promised. You said, yeah, look, we're going to start on site for the client. Everyone's happy. But I would say, and this is no reflection on structural engineers, but a lot of the extension of times I had were down to structural engineers' information at the start, and there is a lot of problems that can occur early on. So if you haven't prepared that IRS, it starts to become a bit tricky on not the claim, because you can still do a claim and put that in, but when you're managing it, you've got to start from the very beginning. How you're going to set the scene, you're going to set the standard. We've done our IRS, right? It might not have every single component, but get the core stuff down, and at least then plot that out with your project manager and send it over to the client and the client's team. Get it over early. Yeah, definitely. It's critical, even if it's not in its final, because you can still have revisions. You can have rev 1, 2, 3. And you're going to have hoped at this stage that the construction program has been at least fleshed out a bit more than the tender program.
But maybe there's logistics, maybe there's site boundary, maybe there's something in there, some little crumb of joy for you so your principal idea is Monday morning. By the end of Monday, you want to have sat down with your ops guy, your project manager, your site manager, whoever, sat down with the estimating team and actually said, right, first and foremost, we've got 1 month. Is there any room to maneuver that, right? So you'll look and then you'll write to the client and say, great to meet you, I'm Chris, you're going to love me. These are the bits and pieces of information we need. Can you provide them by day X? Otherwise, we're going to have a problem.
Essentially, yeah. So you'd be submitting a request for information, so RFI.
This is a two-pronged approach, right? This is really interesting. I asked you to procure a Groundworks package for me with a strict and tough deadline. And rather than do anything down the chain, you've gone straight up the chain and said, I need X, Y, and Z. To just almost push that back towards the client to give you a better chance of doing better work down the chain. So now talk to me about down the chain. We're on Tuesday.
Yeah. So so obviously RFI number 1 goes in. Please issue construction issue information. So that is obviously the first instance, but then you'll be reviewing that again with your project team again, and they would even flesh out even further RFIs and get clarifications on it. They are very adept at understanding technical information, more so than a lot of QSs, I guess.
Definitely me.
Out there, definitely you, Paul. I'm reasonable at it, but not as good as a project manager or construction manager would be. But then you're trying to, so day 1 sorted. But it doesn't mean you stop until you wait for that information to come back. Yeah. You still got to progress your package, right? So at the minute, there's no information to issue to the subcontractors.
Well, there is, because they've already given you've got 3 prices back.
No, but it's still tender information, right? So we've still got the 3 subcontractors that we've got. But there's, like I said, there's no new information today that I need to issue them. But let's call them down to site. We've asked for we've requested further information. Actually, Mr. Subcontractor, is there anything that you see that we should be requesting further clarity on? So they might actually say, oh, you know what, we could do with more, there's no rebar information. We need a rebar scheduling. Yeah. And most people would pick that up if they're a site manager or whatever, but they might say, well, what's the rebar content? What's the rebar scheduling for this? And again, that then stimulates more queries that go over a back and forth on that.
You're already into IRS Rev 2 by the time it's Tuesday evening.
Yeah, and then this is why in the first part of the show I mentioned it does depend on how diligent everyone's been. And if it is a really complicated build like a double-storey basement, there's going to be a lot of queries and it's more complex. But if you were putting down strip foundations in a field, there's probably a lot less.
So answer me this then, because you're talking about a situation where pre-con has been uber diligent, right? This is a very technical package, blah, blah, blah. Take me to a place, and I'm sure you've been on those projects, where the pre-con team hasn't been as diligent as you'd have hoped, right? And so Monday, you're calling up the client saying, hey, nice to meet you, I'm Chris. By the way, I'm going to send over an IRS. Maybe we can have a coffee on site or something like that, blah, 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 blah. Be good to meet. You're going to go see him on Tuesday when you're walking around with your subs. Now, you send that over and it actually really ignites some frustration in the client. And you're sat down with them and they say, well, why didn't I want to start on site on the 1st of July? Why didn't the estimators come up with this? Why didn't
it's come out in negotiations?
I'm annoyed. And you start off on the wrong foot. What are you going to do about it?
So obviously the client relationship is really important, and it can be a real difficult one for the QS to manage, because they are, when pounds and notes are in,
you're the bad guy.
Yeah, and you're the one who's commercially, you can be seen to be commercially kind of cavalier, as I've been labelled as when I was young.
Commercially cavalier.
Yeah. So it is a difficult one, but at this stage, IRS goes in the RFI. These are normal processes to go through with the client team. Yeah. But what could be even better than just sending it is saying, look, let's meet on site, the architect, structural engineer, let's go through it, let's get the detail together and work together as a team, rather than it being absent and you're just firing over by email. So you've got to have a personal touch with them too.
It's a bit like, so rather than being on the hunt, appearing to be on the hunt for an EOT, as we were facetiously saying, what you're actually saying is, look, Mr. Client, what I need from you is X, Y, and Z. I don't think we've got that now. It'd be great if you brought the structural engineer, blah, 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 everyone together, and let's just hit the ground running. And you can sell it to them as, I'm trying to hit the ground running here, not put any blockers in, right? So it's actually, rather than you frustrating the client by saying, we need X, Y, and Z, you're actually putting your arm around them and saying, we need X, Y, and Z to make sure we hit our targets, so help me with that. That actually also really then helps you long term if they don't do it when, and it's about the whole approach, right? And this is the approach to claims, to notices, to everything, right? If your approach on Monday morning is calling the client and saying, cool, I've got a couple of RFIs, probably the easiest way for us to do this is to all meet on site. And if we do that, everything's all good for the 1st of July. When that doesn't happen, you've done everything you can, as opposed to just being like, here's my RFI list, answer that. It's a different approach, isn't it?
And on top of that, by saying, I'm I'm actually on site on Tuesday with the Groundworks subcontractors to take them through. So you look serious that you're doing everything you can to get started. So it's that reasonable best endeavours, reasonable endeavours kind of how we're supposed to operate. And you got to show that in some ways, depending on whatever your contract says. But the right thing to do is, if you've agreed a start date of 1st of July or whatever it is, 1st of June, you've got to do everything that would help that process move forward.
We're bouncing around a lot here, right? But I actually think we've perhaps, because I'm pushing you to go and procure this instantly and you haven't got much time, one of the main things that I would have done, certainly at the start of a project, is I would have had a slightly different approach to you, whereby I would have gone straight for, right, I'll set up the meeting as soon as possible with my counterpart or the client or whoever. That I would have tried to do that, build that relationship straight away. I probably wouldn't have been as savvy as you to go IRS, RFIs. I'd have probably gotten into the detail a bit too much myself to start. I'd get the relationship, say that let's book for like Wednesday, Thursday. Then I'll go into the detail, so then I can speak with them. But I've almost lost a week by that point. So I totally endorse what you're saying. So let's now imagine that the client, you meet him on site on Wednesday, right? And he says, here's everything. See you on the 1st of July on site. So you haven't managed to navigate a way to extend it by 6 weeks or whatever. Mm-hmm. You now need to get your ducks in a row. You've got 4 weeks basically to pick a contractor, get your RAMs done. It's a tough ask to do this, right? Yeah. How are you going to do? What are the key components of your next steps?
Then it is a matter of, I mean, that's why the meeting on the site with the subcontractors is so important, because you're going to get a feel of their availability to kind of mobilise as well. That you're hoping that these guys are within a reasonable difference to each other. Then there's no chasm. There's no one that's at a rock bottom price. They're all within the same, and you've worked with them before. This is like an ideal world situation. So they're your favourite subcontractors. It would be a matter of almost setting up pre-let meetings pretty quickly with them. Mm-hmm. So look, this is construction issue information, and that's gone out. So I hear what you're saying, Paul, that we might be able to start on that date, but depending on what's in that construction issue
Don't
information,
you push back on me, mate.
there could be something in there that might elongate the period for you to be able to start on site. So regardless of what was in that, and if there is that, you want to be booking in those pre-let meetings the week after. So
are you basically saying, sorry to interrupt you, are you saying that, are you kind of treating their first tender to your pre-con is tender, you're now at mid-tender, and then you'll have to do best and final offer afterwards. So your first meeting with them is pretty much mid-tender.
Yeah, more or less. And
this is high stakes stuff, isn't it? On the most important package on the project.
And it's critical path, isn't it? And that's why, and it sets the scene for the whole of the project. If you're late and you've caused a delay at the very start of the project, trying to claw that back is almost it's not impossible, but it's difficult. And on top of that, it doesn't set the whole relationship with the project team, etc., moving forward. And you don't want to be on the back foot procuring and performing your commercial activities. So it is critical, but that's why the resilience of the supply chain is so important. You're going to want to have really good relationships with them. You're going to want to trust them. You're going to want to be able to say, look, out of those three we met, contractor A and B can start, contractor C can't. So unfortunately, they're
gone. So you're down to two.
Yeah, and it is the pre-let meeting that needs to follow up straight away. So you send them the construction issue information the day or day after. We're operating super quick turnaround here.
This is rapid.
It is
much
rapid.
Quicker than any projects that I would have worked on.
And we have been on these projects. So it wasn't necessarily groundworks I had to procure really quickly. Stuff like joinery and lifts. I've been on like a fit out project, which was absolutely rapido turnaround. But that needs to happen very quickly, those pre-let meetings, and within that you're going to be dotting the I's and crossing the T's with those subcontractors, and then you and your project team, so your project manager, construction manager, maybe your director, we're saying, look, we've assessed it, this is our tender recommendation. We think we should go with contractor B, and you then take that forward. And it is high stakes, and you could miss things. And that is a harsh reality of trying to get the subcontractor to start, putting the pressure on your team to start on site and agreeing a deal with the client that you're going to start the next day. And it is, like, I've seen it, I've worked in these organisations, I've seen people go, oh, should we start? There's such an eagerness to start. And like I said, that the RFI and IRS process I go through is to protect the business commercially, because if I didn't, you're not going to highlight delays as easy and make them as apparent when people haven't stuck to their obligations to kind of give you that information.
And the clock starts ticking.
And I've always advised clients, we've worked with end clients before, like developers, and just spend a bit more time, like a week or two, getting the information together, so you're not putting loads of pressure on your team to start and miss something in procurement, because I've seen it happen so many times.
Can you sell a delayed start to a client? So again, you've gone back with your RFI list and your IRS, right, and said, I've got all of these different potential hiccups, right? I know you want me to start on the 1st of July, Mr. Client. Are you sure you want to do that? Because I can get it organised, but you're not going to be ready. And can you sell it to them? Have you in the past sold it to them as, if you do that, my prelims, I'm going to bring my site manager, I'm going to bring my health and safety, X, Y, everything's going to start ticking. Do you want me to do that? Because is that a way to sell it to them?
Yeah, and I think that is the easy way to kind of sell it, is this is, again, down to being diligent at that estimating and negotiation stage, is we've flagged these risks. And some companies out there that might not flag risks because they're like, well, I've got project managers sat around, get them on site, and if we get an extension of time, fair enough. Like, you see that happen. I'm not sure that's from the outset their mindset, but they know that they're covered from a risk perspective. But I've been on so many projects and seen firsthand that I can tell instantly, well, there's lots of information on structural that isn't there. Where's the below ground drainage, for example? Like, sometimes that might be a glaring omission. I've seen that happen. And they're like, no, the M&E guy's doing it. It's like, no, they're not. It's the structural engineers doing the below ground drainage. And it's these little things that might not have been fleshed out that early.
I mean, I think
critical.
I think what this conversation is highlighting to me as your manager in this facetious or fictional, contractor, is we've got to get you or someone who is representing the commercial team into those conversations early, because big red warning light for me is what you just said about the mid-tender meeting. It's no critique of you, but you're in a mid-tender meeting on a package you know nothing about, or you've got less than a week of experience on a project you know nothing about, and you're procuring a package that's going to be running for the next 20 weeks, high risk, and is going to set the tone. And in your own words, you said, mistakes can happen because I've got a gun to my head, which is totally understandable. But how do we mitigate those mistakes? How do we actually impress upon the client? Because why is it that with this Groundworks package, you're coming in as surveyor and actually saying, okay, Mr. Client, look, we need to close off below ground drainage, blah, blah, all these different RFIs. We've got 5 RFIs we need to close off. And they're thinking, well, we could have done this a month ago. And they're thinking, like, I want to get started. Who's this guy now coming in? And you're doing it to protect the business. Whereas if you did that 4 weeks forward, you actually understood that I always felt, at least, I'm going a bit off piste here, but that an understanding of a project literally comes with time. The more time you spend on it, the more you get it, right? And in those first few weeks, it's all a bit of a haze. And then you start to get into kind of like the rhythm of it. So if you're involved early, that means you can flag to the client, we need these 5 RFIs, otherwise you probably put at risk that date, which they're only going to thank you for. Like, I know you're at tender stage and there's this feeling I've been told before, interested to get your view on it, is don't get a QS involved at tender stage, because you're just a risk manager in some ways, right? You like, I asked you what you're going to do, and you've said, we're going to try and find all of these different risks and manage them. And people feel like you don't want that when you're trying to sell. But I think in many cases, once you're down the line with a negotiation and you're one of 2, and you say, look, this is our delivery team, and they're worried about X, Y, and Z. They want to help you manage it. That's no bad thing, right?
No, definitely. And there's a case when I was on a project, and I actually got invited. It was about 2 weeks, or it was around about the contracts being negotiated, so it was a little bit in advance, let's just say. But we had quite a lot of good lead-in times, and there's a lot of strip out involved and etc. So I knew I had quite a bit of time on this. But a big bit of a geek, but I look at like surveys, and like, so you've got obviously asbestos, like contamination. When you're working in these existing buildings, you've got to make sure that all the necessary surveys are in place. And I worked on a previous project that had like lead contamination. So there was a stairwell that needed to be completely like shot blasted, the existing railings, and they used to use lead paint in these old buildings. And I said, does anyone run a lead test on that stairwell, because it was the main stairwell into the project, and to get around. And if they didn't, and it wouldn't have been the biggest end of the world, like the complete catastrophic effects, but what would have happened is we would have had to have had that stairwell would have been out for a period of time, because if it had lead contamination, it would have been more difficult to remove, etc., and things that go around that. And just by doing that, it made them think, oh right, we'll get that done, because knowing that in advance, if it is or not, would mean that we can allow for it early on, and it won't be a difficult conversation to have had, because we've had to completely resequence our works to accommodate this issue. And I think I was probably reviewed as a bit of a cautious QS, and a bit of why are you picking that up? But genuinely, using your knowledge that you've learned over a period of time, you think, I've spotted that. Has anyone thought about it? Because I'd rather just get that agreed right now, and we're going to sequence it this way, and there's an extra $5,000 for it, than have to go through that process as a variation later on down the line. And you've been transparent, and you look like you thought about the project holistically. Yeah,
okay. And so in conclusion, I feel like we haven't even talked about Groundworks really yet. But I mean, that's the way sometimes these conversations go. I think what we've kind of covered is that it's really quite important for that estimate, the pre-construction to construction handoff, estimator to QS, whatever you want to call it, should not be the passing over of, we've won the job, there you go, get cracking. There's got to be something more to it than that. And obviously that is being a bit facetious as to describe that would be the way it goes. But quite often it is quite clinical. And my experience always taught me that the more you involve at the end, the commercial team, to help you navigate these difficult conversations with the client, and in this case, the groundworks, right, which is coming right up in your face, the better you'll be. Subby relationship, resilience of your supply chain, whatever you call it. If you've got any chance on this package that you're telling me about, Chris, you absolutely need to be able to rely on subbies. And you've got to tell them that it's a competitive tender, and they've got to be bought into it. And that's quite a tough thing. So you're only going to be able to do that if you've managed your subbies well, you've communicated with them. Go back and listen to episode 150 or whatever it is. I should know about, there's too many. So that is one thing. In terms of, I find it really interesting that I ask you to procure, and the first thing you're doing is looking up the chain, not down the chain. And I think we were saying hunting for an EOT on from minute one, and that's probably an unfair characterization, because what you're actually trying to do is hunt for risk, right, and actually manage it. Now, if you're doing that, it's then how can I sell this to the client as a benefit to them as opposed to a problem for them. And yeah, I think, is there anything that I haven't covered there that we've discussed, or is there anything else that you want to add, and perhaps we come back to this in a follow-on episode?
No, I think you've summarised it well. I mean, you could go into the nitty-gritty of what's included into a Groundworks package, but that might bore the listeners. But I think because it could be, you're on a fit out project, and I said that's when I've had a gun to my head at a period, or schools or something like that during the holidays. Extremely time pressured projects, and the overarching thing is the resilience of your supply chain. There's ways, obviously, we can be protect ourselves commercially, etc. But on these tight turnaround projects, supply chain is key.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. One final question, if I can, just going back to something that you said. I just want to go back into it. Just looking at my notes here. You said often there is an eagerness to start, an over eagerness to start. Right. What do you mean by that?
So the client would be like, everyone wants to start because it's a big milestone, and they think, yeah, we've got everything in place. Yeah, we're ready. We go. Let's go. And people could be naive, and there could be. It depends on the different types of clients. So I've worked with Mr. and Mrs. Estate groups, developers,
prisons, government.
All of them, and they might want to start. They might want to start for various different reasons. Mr. and Mrs. want to start because they want to move into their new home. A developer might want to start because finance starts on their project, you know. And then, estate groups, they might want to get a project completed because it falls within their financial year, or they need to account for the costs. There's lots of reasons, but if they took a step back and assessed all their projects, I appreciate Mr. and Mrs. won't have that data, but they could look back at their projects and think, well, our projects have lost. When did they lose when does an extension of time happen in these projects? And you probably see it's at the start during structural stages. It could happen later on for sure, but the projects I worked on lost a lot of time during that bit. Can we assess that data and realise actually what was the root cause? And obviously I was a bit flippant and said it's always structural engineer, and that's no criticism on them, but there could be something in there that's unknown. It's this early stage, and honestly I reflect back on my data, which would be anecdotal, and it was a structural engineer that, I don't want to say they caused a delay, but like that's where the information needed further clarity on. Let's take a step back and think, this is not comprehensive at this stage. If we start, we're just going to get a delay. So would you rather start a bit later and have a really great relationship with the client, or would you rather start and not have a great relationship with the client because you put an extension of time
clarity on information?
And I think that is something that the main contractors and these estate groups and the people advising them, so project managers, the architect, these people, contract administrators, should actually take a step back and say, hey, we understand that delays are caused the most in this period of time. And it's normally 6 weeks or whatever. If we spend 2 weeks here up front doing more, we could do more surveys, we could do a bit more exploratory work.
The saving that you get on the prelims as well, right?
And it actually, it's an overall time saving, and it's an overall cost saving.
It's just you don't see it right now.
Yeah, but try and articulate that to clients who are eager to start. It can be challenging. I've not had to do it with many people, but I've kind of advised people, developers that we've worked closely with, and they've asked about information, etc. Back when I used to consult, and I was like, I raised a load of RFIs. This is not fit to go start, guys. If you start, you're going to be banging your head against a brick wall. So I would recommend you do X, Y, Z before you start.
Fantastic. I'm glad I asked you that question because that was an excellent answer.
Thank you.
We will be back. I will be back next week, guys, as I always am. Chris will be back in 4 weeks. Chris, thank you for sharing your expertise. World class. I'm going to continue with that one for you, mate, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you, mate. Enjoyed it.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.